people were so intrigued by what could this Macintosh be, and it's so revolutionary and it's so different. But that ad was a tremendous marketing tool, tremendous.
Welcome to A History of Marketing. I'm Andrew Mitrak, and today my guest is Guy Kawasaki. Guy shaped the field of marketing by popularizing the idea of evangelism in marketing. Today, there are more than 10,000 technology, brand, and product evangelists on LinkedIn, and that wouldn't have happened without Guy. Guy worked at Apple during some of their most iconic marketing moments, so he shares an insider's perspective on the launch of the Macintosh, the 1984 Super Bowl ad, and the Think Different campaign. Guy is also a teacher. He's written many books about marketing and entrepreneurship, and I talk in the episode about how his books influenced me personally as a marketer. If you like this conversation, definitely check out Guy's Remarkable People podcast, in which he interviews the likes of Steve Wozniak, Arianna Huffington, and Seth Godin, and hundreds of others. Now, here it is, my conversation with Guy Kawasaki. Guy Kawasaki, welcome to A History of Marketing.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great name for a podcast, History of Marketing. You got a lot of material to cover there, Andrew.
There's a whole lot of history. I don't know if we'll get to every single campaign and every brand, but we'll try. I want to start with saying what an honor it is to speak with you. When I was a marketer for startups, your book, The Art of the Start 2.0, it was the 2.0 version. It was one of those books that I just referenced over and over.
Wow.
And I feel like I'm speaking to my teacher. So it's amazing.
Well, I hope you, as a student, got value out of the book.
Got a lot of value out of it. So I want to start this conversation way back before you even started your career. In your book, Wise Guy, you write about the time you went to law school.
Yeah.
And then you dropped out after a week and you changed paths to get your MBA and you majored in marketing.
Yeah.
And what was it that drove you to an MBA in marketing?
I wanted to be an entrepreneur as opposed to a lawyer. And so, this is back in the before you were born, this is back in the mid 70s. And back then, if you're Asian American, your parents want you to be a doctor, dentist, or lawyer. So I tried the doctor route and I fainted in the hospital. So I knew doctor was out. And then I read some article about dentists having the highest rate of suicide. So dentistry was out. So all was left was lawyer. And my father was a legislator in the state of Hawaii. He had never gone to college. So it was kind of his dream that, his son go to college, go to law school and, all that kind of stuff. And I hated law school. I hated it so much I quit.
After you quit law school, what was it that drove you to pursue an MBA and focus on marketing of all things?
I'll tell you something. The interesting thing is that back then, an MBA was some kind of dues that you paid. And if you wanted to get ahead in business, you had an MBA. And so back then in that 1970, 1980 timeframe, you had to get an MBA to get good positions in business. Now, of course, the interesting thing is, like, if someone were to ask me today, do I need to get an MBA to be an entrepreneur? I would tell you absolutely not, that, it is neither necessary nor sufficient. And what you should do is, if you're the geek, find the marketer. If you're the marketer, find the geek and get rolling. You shouldn't go get an MBA.
Your LinkedIn profile says this. It says education, UCLA, MBA, and your quote on it is, I've come to believe that an MBA is a hindrance to entrepreneurship, but I do have one from UCLA.
At least I'm honest.
Do you think that there was any value from your marketing courses, or were you taught things that you were able to apply?
I can't exactly condemn the whole MBA program. It's not exactly the MBA's fault. It's, you get out of a degree what you put into the degree. And the funniest thing is I became very good friends with my marketing professor. To this day, we're friends. And yes, I learned the classical marketing things from Philip Kotler, like, the 5 Ps or the 4 Ps or the 3 Ps or whatever those Ps are. I got a bunch of Ps. Price, promotion, place, and price, promotion, place. There's something else.
Product, price,
wow.
Place, promotion. Yeah.
So, I learned that, and I learned the, classical marketing lingo. So when a consulting firm comes into your company, tries to bullshit you with marketing terms, it'd be nice to know the marketing terms they're trying to bullshit you with.
A lot of people who get MBAs join those consulting firms, but you didn't do this. While you were in business school, you worked part-time at a jewelry company.
Yeah.
And to quote your book, I started out by counting diamonds and left 5 years later as the vice president of sales and marketing. So what does sales and marketing look like for a jewelry company in the 1970s?
The jewelry business is hand-to-hand combat. You have to learn how to sell. Now, when people here in 2024 learning to sell, you're thinking, oh, it's a Google A/B test, or you're testing various forms of chat GPT text. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about hand-to-hand combat sales in jewelry means, you make an appointment with a fine jewelry retailer, you fly to Kansas City, the appointment's at 10, you know, they finally come out and say hello to you at 11, then they keep you waiting another hour, and then they give you 15 minutes for you to show them your line. And in that 15 minutes, they're telling you your stuff is too expensive, and we can get this anywhere cheaper, and blah blah blah. And so you learn patience, you learn rejection, you learn a lot of things that are very useful for the rest of your life.
Mhm. Totally. So it sounds like this job was a little more sales than marketing. Is that fair?
Well, let me put it to you this way, Andrew. I believe that all of life is sales. That, people think sales is just this act of taking these orders down, or, having people click through and put something in a shopping basket and then use Apple Pay to pay. But I'm telling you, life is sales. You sell to get a date, you sell to get a job, you sell to get an upgrade to first class in United, even though you got a coach fare. You're selling the front desk clerk to give you a corner room because you need more space to have meetings in the morning. I mean, you're selling the clerk to say, checkout is at 11, but I got a meeting at 12. Can I get late checkout? I hate to tell you, but life is sales.
Life is sales. Yeah. So moving on past the jewelry company, you joined Apple in 1983, which seems like a really exciting time to join Apple. And it was Mike Boich, who was the first software evangelist who hired you.
Yeah.
And you write in your book that Steve Jobs told Mike, you can hire a guy, but you're betting your job on him. And so do you know why Mike was willing to bet his job on you? What was it that got you this role?
Well, it was 100% pure, honestly, nepotism.
Yeah.
We were very good friends at Stanford. I'm going to take you down a little bit of a rat hole, right? So now,
Yeah.
when I was a young kid in Hawaii, somebody gave me a ride in his Porsche 911. And when I rode in that 911, I said, oh my God, this is why you got to study, guy. This is why you got to work hard, because you don't want to buy and use a Toyota Corona for the rest of your life. You want to drive a German or Italian car. And I fell in love with cars, and I was obsessed with cars. Then I get to Stanford and I meet this guy named Mike Boich. He too was obsessed with cars. The difference between me and him is that I wanted to have cars, and he was from a wealthy family. He had nice cars. He had a Ford GT40, which is probably worth $5 million today, although he doesn't have it, because he made one of the worst deals in the history of automotive trades. He traded a Ford GT40 for a 1976 911 Turbo. The 911 Turbo might be worth, I don't know, 150,000 today, but it would be much better to have the Ford GT40. So anyway, we get to Stanford. Somehow we meet and we forge this friendship over cars, not over computer science, not over Apple One, not over programming basic or Fortran or anything like that. Our friendship was based on a love of cars. And then we graduated, and he went to Hewlett Packard, and from Hewlett Packard he got a promotion and went to Apple's Mac division. And then he called me up and he said, we need somebody to be an evangelist. And I'm telling you, 90% of my qualifications was that I was his friend.
So he calls you up and says, we want an evangelist. And evangelist was kind of a new word. It was unique to Apple. I think you write that Mike Murray, the director of marketing for Macintosh, he's the one who
Exactly.
coined this
Right.
term, software evangelism. So
Well, there was
what?
Jesus
Yeah,
before Mike Murray, but yeah.
right. Yeah, but like that's exactly right. That evangelism is this term that's really associated up to that point with religion. And what was your reaction to, is my job title is going to be evangelist? Like, is there any explaining you had to do when your business card said evangelist?
There were people who looked askance at that concept. I mean, particularly if you were a hardcore Christian, you're thinking, what are these punks from Silicon Valley? They're appropriating our word, Jesus and John, and now Mike and Guy, not quite the same category there, bro. So yeah, there was some of that. There was some pushback in the sense of like, what the hell is an evangelist do? I mean, they're the guys who tell me to come down during the Sunday service and, give witness to Christ. I mean, is that what you're asking me to do? Well, in a sense, we're asking them to come down and embrace Macintosh, but that's not exactly evangelism in their minds. And I want people listening to this that understand that evangelism comes from a Greek word meaning bringing the good news. And so what I did was I brought the good news. I brought the good news that Macintosh would make you more creative and more productive because of its graphical user interface and its WYSIWYG printing. I brought the good news to developers that this is a product that you're no longer just dependent on IBM PC. We have much, much richer ROMs, so you can program the software you always dreamed of creating. And this easy to use, fun, cool computer will open up a market to people who would have never bought a computer. So that was the Macintosh religion. And so my job was to bring the good news of Macintosh evangelism to developers so that they would create Macintosh products.
You still remember the pitch to this day. Now, so you weren't the first evangelist and you didn't come up with evangelism, but if you think of who in the world is most associated with evangelism for a product or for technology or in the secular sense, it'd be Guy Kawasaki.
I think that's a good thing.
I think it's a good thing. No, I think I looked around and sometimes you've been referred to as the father of evangelism marketing. And
Well, I mean, to be quite honest, Mike Boyd was the first evangelist, the first, secular tech evangelist. I was the second one, but I get all the credit.
you get well, yeah, I think we'll go on to later as we get forward in your career. You did sort of evangelize this concept of evangelism.
Yeah.
And so what did the daily work of an evangelist look like at that
Well,
time?
the big picture is we bring the good news. So the concept is, well, how do you bring the good news? And what we did is basically we did a lot of demos. We showed people Mac Write and Mac Paint. And basically if you saw Mac Paint or Mac Write in the mid 80s, having used the Apple II DOS and character operating system or IBM PC MS-DOS operating system, and you saw Mac Paint and Mac Write and the Macintosh Finder, it was a religious experience. And so we would show them the good news and ask them to believe in Macintosh as much as we did.
You joined in 83 as an evangelist for the Macintosh, and Macintosh hadn't launched yet, right? So did you have to like have people sign NDAs or carry it in like a secret suitcase, or what was that like?
Yeah, to get a Macintosh demo, you had to sign an NDA, and if you wanted to get a Macintosh prototype, you had to give us your firstborn child. I mean, but yeah, there was a lot of secrecy, and I actually think that the secrecy added to the mystery and the romance of this computer. I'm not telling you we were paranoid and doing this because we were such sly marketers. We said, we don't care if everybody knows about it, but let's make it really hard to find out just for marketing purposes. No, we really wanted it to be a secret and make a big splash on January 24th, 1984.
I think I know what you're referring to. This is like a natural segue to what's often referred to as the best advertisement of all time, Apple's 1984 ad that aired at the Super Bowl. When did you first see the ad? What was your initial reaction to it?
I saw, I saw it on January 24th, 1984 on TV. I mean, there was a very small group of people who had seen that ad. It was Mike Murray because he was in charge of marketing. Steve Jobs, obviously, probably Steve Jobs' direct reports. But I don't want to give you the impression that I was BFFs with Steve Jobs. I was like, let's see, it was Steve Jobs to Mike Murray to Mike Boyd to Guy. So,
Right. What was the reaction among other Apple employees or other folks in the sales and marketing team when they saw this ad for the first time?
That's a mixed bag because at that time, the Apple II was the shipping computer. The Apple II was
Yeah.
100% of the revenue, right? And yet there was this small collection in the Macintosh division who thought that, our product was so much better, even though your product is paying for our product and your product is paying for our salaries and your product is paying for our building and everything. But we were the hand-picked spoiled brats of Steve Jobs. So there was some resentment, honestly, and I can't say I blame them. And then, in a sense, there was always a battle for developers, right? So for developers making Apple II software, and then Guy and Mike Boyd show up and say, we want you to do Macintosh software. Well, guess what? The Apple II people weren't exactly thrilled that we were trying to convince people to do Macintosh software. But
Yeah.
eventually Macintosh honestly killed the Apple II, but it was walking a tightrope there because you don't want to kill the Apple II. You don't want to kill the cash cow before the calf is born, to use a
Totally.
farming metaphor.
Did this ad make your job easier? Did people want to buy and develop for the Macintosh because of this ad, or what did it do?
Made it much easier because people were so intrigued by what could this Macintosh be, and it's so revolutionary and it's so different and it's so mysterious and it's so cool, and it had this great ad that nobody had ever seen an ad like that before. And that ad, which was almost killed by the board of directors, but that ad was a tremendous marketing tool. Tremendous.
So from 1983 to 1987, you were on the evangelist team for the Macintosh. And then you left Apple in 1987. You write books like The Macintosh Way and Selling the Dream. And this is when you kind of became something of an evangelist for the concept of evangelism. Start writing publicly about evangelism. Did you see other companies start to also hire evangelists around this time?
I will say that the creation of the secular evangelist career didn't take off that fast because there are not a lot of companies like Apple, and it's not so important semantically that you use the word evangelist. What's so important is the concept that you are marketing something that is good news. And the good news is not for your benefit, it's for the benefit of the customer, right? So the difference between evangelism and most sales is that most sales is about the salesperson. This is my quota, this is my bonus, this is my salary. Please buy my widget so I can make my bonus. With Macintosh, and I tell you, I absolutely 100% promise you this was true, that when we were evangelizing Macintosh, we believed in our head, yes, it's good for us as Apple employees, but it's also very good for you because you will become more creative and productive. So it's not just about me making my quota, it's about you improving your life.
Absolutely. Now, you returned to Apple in the mid-90s, this time as chief evangelist.
Yes.
How had evangelism at Apple evolved between the time you left and when you returned?
Well, I left in 87 and I returned in 95. And, those are like a few difficult years. John Sculley was fired, Steve Jobs was fired, layoffs, everybody thought Apple was going to die. So really, I was brought back to maintain the Macintosh cult and maintain the Macintosh developer community, as a chief evangelist, chief cheerleader, all that kind of good stuff. It was a glorious time. I mean, it was the most satisfying work. It sounds immodest, but I kind of helped Apple survive that period.
This is the time where I think it was Michael Dell saying they should just sell the company
Yeah,
and
give the
return it to
money back.
shareholders,
Yeah.
which is probably the worst call of all time, maybe. But anyway, it turns around at this time, and it does seem like in that late '90s, mid to late '90s period, and when you returned, Apple does really turn around.
Well, I could actually make the case if you really knew whenever I left, Apple turned around. Because I left in 97 and then it started really doing well. And I am no Steve Jobs. I am no Steve Wozniak. I'm no Tim Cook. Don't give me too much credit.
One of the things during this turnaround is another. We talked about the 1984 ad, but another top Apple campaign is this Think Different campaign, and
Yeah.
you were in the room when Lee Clow from Chiat Day presented this campaign for the first time. Can you describe what this presentation was like?
Yeah.
What was it? Yeah.
So, this is just as Steve is about to return, having been, let's say, purged from Apple. So he was coming back after the purge. And back then, it was kind of really like almost a negative to use a Macintosh because this is a tarnished company and it was going to die and, blah, blah, blah. Although the Macintosh believer never really bought into that, I'll tell you that. The faithful were faithful all through that. And so we couldn't exactly make a credible case that, this is the safe purchase, that this is mainstream, that this is conservative, and this is, logical and all that. So the people at Shia, they came up with this genius ad campaign about, yeah, if you want to be like Pablo Picasso or Richard Branson or Jim Henson or Amelia Earhart Gandhi. So basically, the campaign was, these are the kinds of people who think different. And if you want to think different and be remarkable like them, you would use a Macintosh. And that ad, that whole sentiment just so fit in with the mentality of the Macintosh employee and Macintosh believer. That was the genius of Lee Clow and the team at Chiat.
So would you be open to sharing the story of what happened after this presentation?
Well, of course. So Lee Clow gives this presentation of Think Different to the marketing department. There had to be, I don't know, 15, 20 marketing people there. At the end, Lee Clow says, I have 2 copies of the videotape, Steve, of all the ads. I'm going to give you 1 copy and 1 copy to Guy. And Steve says, don't give it to Guy. So I said to Steve, what's the matter, Steve? Don't you trust me? And Steve, as only Steve would, he says, yes, Guy, I do not trust you. And this was one of those moments in your life where if you look back and you say, why was I such a wimp? Why did I just back down and say, oh, it's okay, Steve, yeah, you're Steve Jobs. I'm just a little pimple on the face of this earth. So that was a man or mouse moment. And so when he said that, I said, it's okay, Steve. I don't trust you either. And that probably cost me $250 million, but it was worth it. Now I
Oh
get
my
to tell
gosh.
this story.
Well, for me, the story, it really strikes a nerve. I think we've all been in some situation where somebody who's higher up, they're being somewhat of a bully or just flexing their power or diminishing their team or
Well,
something.
I
And
mean, well, but the funny thing is, a few years later, Steve offered me another job, but like a jackass, I turned that down. So
yeah. Moving on to one that seems to be a very good call to work with is Canva. You're now the chief evangelist at Canva. They make a great product. I use it for this podcast. What does your role as an evangelist look like today?
well, it's just like before. I'm telling the good news of Canva. So what Canva does is it empowers people to be better communicators because it empowers you to create your own graphics.
Mhm.
And that wasn't something people could do before. I mean, if you've ever tried Illustrator or Photoshop, you know that you don't just whip those things out and start creating great graphics. So Canva democratized design just like Macintosh democratized computers. So I like to democratize things.
Being an evangelist this day and age, there's social media today. There wasn't back in the 80s. Canva is a software product that's online, and the Macintosh was before the internet as we know it today, and it was a hardware product.
Yeah.
Is your role as an evangelist strikingly different, with Canva now
No.
versus Mac back then?
Well, obviously, when evangelizing Canva, you had more technology than a fax machine and a cell phone in the trunk of your car. So that helps. I mean, there's all these online services, these social media platforms. There's where to send graphics. In fact, the ability for people to send graphics is kind of like the inflection point that made Canva so useful, right? If there was no need to send graphics with Twitter, well, guess what? People wouldn't be making graphics. And if they wouldn't be making graphics, they didn't need Canva.
Right.
So it all kind of worked out. And yes, Canva is an online, software service, and Macintosh is like plastic and silicon and glass and steel. But I I think it's more similar than different. That it's good news. Good news is good news.
Outside of evangelism, I could probably spend hours asking you questions about social media. How has social media impacted evangelism?
Well, social media has impacted evangelism because it gives you a way to spread the good news better than anything ever before.
Mhm.
I don't know how much it costs to make the 1984 commercial. Let's say it's 1 million. Let's say the spot was 5 million. So 6 million to run a 1984 commercial. You can buy a lot of ads on social media for $6 million, especially 1984 dollars, what it would be today. So the technology has made spreading the good news much easier. Of course, the technology has also made spreading bad news and the incorrect news and the conspiracy news easier
Yeah.
too. So there's more noise.
That's right. I bet if anybody spent $6 million on a social media ad today, though, we wouldn't be talking about it 40 years from now in 2065, the way we're talking about the Apple 1984 ad, though. So
No.
there's something about that. As we start to wrap up, one kind of random question for you, or a fun
Yeah.
one, is that in all of the books of yours that I read, you start each chapter with a quote. And I was writing down these quotes because they're all so great. And you seem to collect and find the perfect quote for the perfect chapter, and how do you go about collecting and keeping track of your
Okay.
favorite
So
quotes? Yeah.
I don't know where I started that practice. I must have read somebody else's book who did that. And I thought, this is like, I would say, when you have that at the start of a chapter, it's kind of like when you have a banana split and the first thing you eat is the cherry, right? So that's the cherry on top. And so in the old days, when I had to find these quotes, I had I had literally, I don't know, a dozen books of quotes. It was, God, oh, Bartlett's. I think it was like Bartlett's
Yeah.
books of quotations. Yeah. So there was Bartlett's and all that. So literally, I would just, it was just brute force. And then the next generation of guy finding good quotes was Goodreads, because Goodreads has these, favorite Goodreads quotes where you can just put in the word innovation and it'll give you every quote about innovation. But now in my latest book, because I just finished another book, it's called Wiser Guy. I did a book 5 years ago called Wise Guy. And now I just completed a book called Wiser Guy. God forbid, maybe someday I'll write Wisest Guy, but right now we're going to stick with Wiser Guy. And I gotta tell you, you just go to ChatGPT or any AI model and you say, "Give me 20 quotes about innovation," and 2 seconds later, you have 20 quotes about innovation from Tom Peters or Steve Jobs or, God forbid, Bill Gates or, Elon Musk or whatever. You got these 20 quotes. And
Yeah.
then you pick the one that you like, and then you ask Madison, please make sure that ChatGPT didn't hallucinate that Isaac Asimov said this. Make sure that Isaac Asimov really did say this about innovation, because I don't want to make an ass of myself and put in my book an Isaac Asimov quote that ChatGPT hallucinated. So now finding those quotes is very easy. Well, it's very easy to get a bunch of quotes to pick from. I would say it's still somewhat of an art to figure out which one of those 20 you pick.
Absolutely. I'm glad that fact checking was part of the process there. I copied down a lot, but one that felt like a fitting place to part with was, what you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. And that's from Pericles. And I just thought that one was
in Wise Guy.
That was in Wise Guy. That was a very good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well,
I hope he really said that.
Yeah. It was in Greek. I'm sure it was translated in somewhat, but yeah.
I've never had anybody send me a message that says, you know what, you said Aristotle said that. It wasn't Aristotle. It was Karl Marx or something.
Yeah. As we wrap up, you've had a long career in marketing. What are some words of wisdom that you would share with marketers who are listening to this podcast who want to become better marketers themselves?
I've had a wonderful life being an evangelist and a marketer. And so this is advice from an old evangelist and marketer to, I hope, young evangelist and marketer. So the first thing you need to understand is that it is not about you. It is about them. So if you think that you're going to use this sales technique or this marketing technique or this evangelism technique to get your quota and bonus, and it's all about you, you're going to fail. Well, actually, you might succeed, but you won't be an evangelist. So you got to be thinking, you got to work backwards from the customer, not forward from what you want to do. That's number one. Number two piece of advice is you have got to learn how to demo your product, because the demo is the most important part of evangelism. It's not the pitch. It's not the bullshit text, even that ChatGPT generated. It's how good can you demo your Macintosh or your Canva or your motorcycle or your electric car or your software as service, whatever it is. You got to do good demos. If you cannot do a good demo, you're going to suck as an evangelist. So get that through your thick skull. And the third thing is that as an evangelist, just remember, always think good news, good news, good news. It's not about me. It's good news. What is the good news I'm bringing? And that's about all I can tell you about evangelism.
Well, Guy, thanks so much for this conversation. It's been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed it.
Sure. Thank you very much.
A History of Marketing is written and produced by me, Andrew Mittrak. If you'd like new episodes delivered right to your inbox, visit marketinghistory.org. There you can also find transcripts of every conversation, including helpful links, images, videos, and other blog posts about marketing history. You can send me an email at hello@marketinghistory.org. If you'd like to support A History of Marketing, consider leaving a review on your favorite podcasting app, or better yet, tell a friend about the show. Thanks for listening.